This is the Tom Bigby Tales, and I'm your host, Shannon Evans. I write about a small town in northeast Mississippi called Columbus, and sometimes I write about the rest of the state. Tonight, I'm going to be sharing some stuff with you, and I'll be sharing my screen. And this one's going to be a little bit difficult for me, so hang on to your hat. This particular episode, we're going to be talking about the Preservation Society of Columbus and the Masonic Lodge and the preservation of older buildings in town. This podcast is difficult for me to make, but it is an important episode as it's about members of my community, historians and preservationists, who use local grant money from our tax dollars to hold events to fundraise for a preservation project for a vulnerable group in our community and never delivered on their promise. And that really pains me deeply, and it's so incredibly disappointing. But before I can explain the how, I need to share some background information. Columbus is a small river town filled with gorgeous pre-Civil War architecture. From our churches and courthouse to the pre-1860s cottages and grand homes, the town is filled with history. Each spring, many of the homeowners throw their doors open and allow visitors to peek inside, walk through their homes, and see the time capsules that they steward. This is our spring pilgrimage, and it draws tourists from all over the world to our town. There are two nonprofit associations of homeowners who participate in the event. The Historic Homes of Columbus and the group we're talking about tonight, the Preservation Society of Columbus. The former focuses only on antebellum homes, and the latter, the Preservation Society, is a mixed bag of progressive presentations like Behind the Big House, Lunch and Learns about architecture, or special projects and home tours that range from 1820 homes to mid-century moderns. The Preservation Society also promotes its events as fundraisers for specific projects. I'm a public historian and work specifically in the area of preservation of African American history and sacred spaces and social justice issues related to Black history. I do research in this space, and I also write grant applications for community organizations, specifically in the Black community. A week ago, I was approached by our historic, traditionally Black Masonic Lodge to apply for a grant to assist them in replacing or restoring 8 to 12 windows on their building. Their building is on the location of the original Penny Savings Bank, the first Black-owned bank in Lowndes County. This bank was founded during Reconstruction by local Black leaders. Above the bank was their Masonic Lodge. During that time, fraternal organizations were segregated just as any schools that might have existed would have. The Masonic Lodge is still active, and their building is in desperate need of some TLC. According to the lodge leaders, in 2022 or early 2023, like January, the Preservation Society of Columbus entered into talks to help the lodge. The roof was in such poor condition that rainy days meant rain on and in the lodge. This resulted in cracked and falling plaster and lots of peeling paint and some rotting wood molding. The Preservation Society of Columbus offered to partner with the Masonic Lodge that owns the Penny Savings Bank to help cover some of the costs of a new roof. It's not clear exactly how much they promised to help financially, like what amount, but they made a financial commitment to help sponsor at least a portion of the cost. They even posted on April 5th, 2023, a photo of the front of the building and the following description. So let me share that with you. As you can see, it says that the Preservation Society of Columbus on April 5th of 2023, Wednesday at 12:14 in the afternoon, they wrote, "The Penny Savings Bank is located in downtown Columbus at 100-198 North 5th Street and is founded in 1906. The Penny Savings Bank was Columbus's first African American bank. Mr. W.I. Mitchell served as the president of the bank from 1907 to 1913. Mr. Mitchell also served as Columbus's Union Academy principal from 1878 to 1916. That was the segregated school for Black children. This bank financed and encouraged development of Black businesses, as well as providing a place for African American savings accounts. The Preservation Society of Columbus, a nonprofit organization dedicated to preserving and marking all important historic sites in Columbus, is working to repair the roof of this site. So they made a promise. They then hosted this series of events called Lunch and Learns. Tickets were sold to an event on April 8th, 2023, and the tickets were sold to the public under the auspices that the event would help sponsor the roof repairs across the street at the 1940s Penny Savings Bank building. The guest speaker for the event was Diane Hayes, who spoke at the luncheon upstairs at the Columbus Arts Council building about architectural concepts students were developing for a memorial to honor the enslaved who had passed through the trading horrors of the Devil's Punch Bowl in Natchez, Mississippi. The room was packed. It was sold out, and members of the community were there to hear about the project and support the fundraising efforts of our own local preservation of Black historic sites. There were at least 50 people in the room, if not more. The box lunches were delicious, the conversations at each table friendly and lively, and the presentation was professional, informative, and incredibly moving. After the event, we all went our merry ways, thinking we had supported the event and the preservation of a historic building in our community. That was 2 years ago. Last week, I got a message from our mayor asking if it was okay to give my name and phone number to the Black Masonic Lodge in the Penny Savings Bank building. They needed help finding and writing grants. I, of course, took the call. The treasurer told me the group was looking to replace their windows. They are original to the building and in bad repair. The wood is rotting in places, and the windows were warping, and there were gaps between the brick of the building and the window frames. He then told me we bit the bullet and put a new roof on last year, and we painted and replastered where the ceiling had leaked. We spent all our extra dollars on that. We need help with finding a grant for our windows. I told him I'd help, and I said we needed to do some preliminary work, like getting bids and finding grants. And then I asked, do you have any of the Preservation Society money left over from their roof repair donation? What donation? We never saw a dime. I was kind of taken aback. So I said, you mean they never gave you anything like a gift or a grant to help with the roof? No, ma'am. We used some of our savings, and some of the men chipped in to pay for the $11,000 for the roof. And then we had to come up with extra for paint and plaster work done by another guy, and myself. I helped get that done. I'll double check our books, but I do not remember ever getting any money from the Preservation Society. The treasurer was adamant about that. If I was to write a grant for them, I needed to know for certain if a gift, a grant, or a donation had ever been made to them in the last several years. So I started trying to find the current treasurer for the Preservation Society of Columbus. I went to the Mississippi Secretary of State website to see if I could figure out who was the treasurer so I could call them and ask if a gift had been made. I did find out who they were. Unfortunately, they were out of the country, so I called another board member who said they did not recall, but would find out if they had ever given any money. That member texted me back shortly after and informed me that no gift was ever made, and they hoped I would be able to help the Masons find a grant and be successful in getting the funding. I went back to my new Masonic friend and updated him. He was clearly disappointed, and we talked about the event that had happened with the Preservation Society that was done with the understanding that it was hosted to help them and that the event was full. He was there, and he knew that that event was full. He then added he has never heard back from the board about a gift or a grant to help with the roof. So the lodge bit the bullet and had to replace the roof and fix the ceiling. So now that really made me curious. Perhaps the Preservation Society was upside down in their cash after all the events and had no money to give that year. That happens. So I went to look at their financials. The Preservation Society of Columbus is a nonprofit organization. They have a board, like most organizations do, and their president is Jace Ferez. Their vice president is Corey Coleman, and the treasurer is Debbie Fancher for the year in question. The organization files 990s with the IRS each year. Those 990s are a matter of public record. So, just like every other nonprofit in the US, they are something you can research and find. There are several sites online where you could look at these records. I use Candid for this one, and GuideStar is another one you can use. Anyways, these are free sites you can use to search for 990s and various bits and bobs of information about other nonprofits. So let me show you what that page looks like. This is Candid. I just searched by name, but if you know their EIN number or other things, if you wanted to know who in Columbus has a nonprofit, you could just put Columbus, Mississippi, and you would pull up all the nonprofits that have made tax filings. This is the 990 for the Preservation Society of Columbus. This is the one that they filed in 2024. So it is the 2023 expenditures. So here we are. We can see that they had $30,000 in gifts and grants and $18,731 from fees and contracts. As you can see, that would add up to $48,731, and we see they have a $5,633 loss. Now, we'll talk more about that loss in a minute. So, where did they get the $30,000? The $30,000 was a grant, and it's essentially a stipend that they got from the Columbus Visitors Bureau to help conduct their pilgrimage. And they had $18,731 in revenue from events. Now, that could be from anything from ticket sales to their home tours, their lunch and learns, their cocktail parties, events at cemeteries, or whatever they decide to do. Then we see that they had a loss on a fundraising event for $5,633. Now, what was that event? Hopefully not the lunch and learns. However, that could explain why they had no money to donate to the Masons. So I went to find if there was any more information on this event that would explain such a significant loss. So we're going to scroll down to part 2. You can see this is page 21, where it shows part 2 fundraising events. They sold $707 in tickets. Now, if this is the event I think it is, the tickets were $100 per person. So does that mean only 7 people bought a ticket? Now, from the photos, there looked like a lot more than 7 people there. So I'm presuming they gave their own membership free entry. Don't know. Now, they only sold $707 in tickets. That is their income from their party. Now let's look at what it cost for them to host it. Their rent for their facility was $2,329. Other direct costs were $4,011. I am presuming that would be the bar tab, the caterer, and the cost of hiring the people to serve the tables. That means that their cost was $6,340, but they only made $707. So they lost $5,633 at their event. That is an exorbitant loss. However, could that explain why they didn't have any money to donate? Well, they advertised this gala as fundraising for the Preservation Society itself. So that doesn't cover why the Masons didn't get any of that money, because that money for that event was not designated for the Masons. But it's really sad that their net for the event was a negative $5,633. So they spent $6,340. They lost $5,633. That was an expensive loss. So the gala clearly was not the lunch and learns. This was a totally different event. And the advertising for it says that the tickets were to benefit the Preservation Society from this gala. So then I needed to see if they ended the year at a deficit. They lost money at their party. Were they in the hole for the whole year? I mean, that could definitely immediately explained not having any money to gift the Masons, and possibly they would, if they were losing money, they would hope the whole thing would go away. But that's not accurate either, because they ended the year with money in the bank and a lot more than they ended with the previous year. Previous year, they ended with like $800 in the bank. This particular year, they ended with a lot more. I mean, that's a positive thing for their organization. But before we get to that amount, I found a bunch of interesting numbers stuffed in a box at the end of the 990. So we're going to scroll to section O. Now, section O is kind of the end of the paperwork, and it's the supplemental information. If you look down here, you'll see a description of those amounts. So they have advertising and promotion, $19,367. The bulk of their money should go to advertising for their event, especially the money that's given to them to host the pilgrimages and to host the events. You need people to come and they don't know about it, so you have to advertise, of course. But here's the one that just blows my mind: conferences, conventions, and meetings. $9,933. That's almost 21% of their money was spent on going to conferences, conventions, and meetings. Now, does that mean they went to conferences and conventions? What conferences and conventions did they go to? How many people went? Why? What was the purpose of those conferences and conventions? Or did they spend $9,933 to host their own meetings? Did they have catered meetings? How many meetings did they have? Why would it cost $9,933? That seems like a really high amount to me. And if I were looking at this organization and going to give them advice on how to go forward, that would be one of the expenses that I would raise an eyebrow at and question. This next piece of this says pilgrimage home rental for events, $3,000. What home did they rent for an event that cost $3,000? Now we know the gala was held somewhere and they spent over $2,000 for that. So this is an additional $3,000 for what? What event? Where? It's all very interesting to me that there are these large amounts and there's no explanation anywhere. It's just kind of lumped in here. Okay, so we now know that there's been some money going around. They spent almost 21% of their budget on these. But let's forget all that. Let's just go back at the top and let's look at the bottom line. They brought in $48,000 for the year. We know that. They spent $37,190 in total. They tell us that in their 990. Even with the loss from the gala, they still ended the year with money in the bank. Let's look. I think that's important to see and to understand. And it also helps us to come up with what we're going to go ask them in the end to make good on their word and their plans to help the Masonic Lodge. They had $48,000. They lost $5,000 in their event. Their total revenue was $43,160. And they are left with their net assets or funds balances at the end of the year. They have $5,686. I think I found some of the money that they had promised to the Masons. I think it's just sitting in their account waiting for them to gift to the Masons. So let me go back and let me stop this and let's finish this up because I think this is important and I think it's worth asking some really serious questions. We see that even with the $5,000 loss from the gala, they still ended the year with a positive $5,686 in the bank. We know that the year before they had about $800 in the bank at the end of the year. So they were able to function until the next fall because they don't really do anything until they get their money again from the CVB and the whole cycle starts all over again. The CVB meaning the Columbus Visitors Bureau. We are looking at this $5,686, and perhaps that includes the money they forgot to donate to the Masons. I think the Preservation Society has a great opportunity here to make good on their promises to the Masons and the restoration of the Penny Savings Bank building. The Masons have paid for that roof. They paid 11K for it, but they're still in need of funds to replace the 8 windows and 3 transoms on the building. Wouldn't now be a great time for the Preservation Society to make that gift and help the lodge as they move forward in their continued restoration efforts? Now is the chance for the Preservation Society board to make good on their promise to the Masonic Lodge and to help them to continue to preserve this historic building in downtown Columbus. So rather than focus on the negative and point fingers and say that they, you know, use these people's names to try and raise money or whatever. I think they sincerely meant to help. I think something happened. They either forgot that they had made that promise, although I don't know how they forgot. They didn't raise as much as they thought they would. I don't know if there was a dollar amount they promised the Masons, but I tell you what, at this point, the Masons would be happy to get $5,000 because it would definitely go a long ways to help them replace the windows that they're going to need replaced in the lodge. But it would also go a long ways to return faith in the organization of the Preservation Society of Columbus. I think that this is a grand opportunity to do the right thing. I hope they do. I hope somebody shares this with their board. Their board, as I said before, was Jace Ferez, Corey Coleman, who I believe is a realtor in town. Jace is an attorney, and Debbie Fancher, who is their treasurer. Perhaps someone can motivate this organization to make that gift, and maybe members of the community will want to help the Masonic Lodge to replace those windows and to continue their preservation efforts. If the Preservation Society of Columbus is sincere about being preservationist, this is a grand opportunity for them to step up and make right something that they dropped the ball on. I want to thank you for coming on my podcast, The Tom Baby Tales. Until next time.